Okay, and now we are live. Okay. Let's. Okay, I think it's on the Facebook now. ตอนนี้ก็ไลฟ์เริ่มแล้วนะครับ by the way, the session will be like both English and Thai doing like 10 minutes of the conversation to make sure that everyone is like in the same page. And apart from that, we'll be discuss in English language.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay, so ก็สวัสดีทุกคนอีกครั้งนะครับวันนี้ก็ห่างหายกันมานานเนาะกับ AMA นะครับก็เดี๋ยววันนี้เนี่ยก็จะมาคุยกับAMA กับเซนะครับก็เราจะมาพูดคุยนะครับเกี่ยวกับประเด็นหลายๆอย่างแล้วกันที่ช่วงนี้เซก็ค่อนข้างเป็นสิ่งที่คนพูดถึงเนาะแล้วก็เดี๋ยวจะมีทั้งเซสชันไทยอังกฤษในช่วงแรกๆนะครับแล้วหลังๆจากนั้นช่วงกลางๆเนี่ยจะมีแค่เป็นฝั่งของภาษาอังกฤษเนาะก็ใครที่อยากฟังย้อนหลังเนี่ยสามารถดูได้ทาง YouTube หรือ Facebook ผ่านทาง ContributionDAO ได้เลยนะครับ Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Chom from ContributionDAO. It's been a while since the last AMA, and today we are grateful to have Say as an AMA partner today. Okay, so hi everyone. Hello all. Let's begin with the introduction. Like Jay, maybe you can like give you some introduction about yourself, like where are you working at and what are you building?
Of course, yeah. So good evening, ContributionDAO community. And thanks for having me on, Tom. So for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm a co-founder of SEI Labs. And my background is that I was originally born in India, moved to the US when I was 4. And afterwards, I've just been in primarily Silicon Valley my entire life. So I grew up in Silicon Valley. I went to high school over here as well. And I ended up meeting my current co-founder through speech and debate, because both of us went to competing high schools, and our high schools would do practice debates against each other occasionally. So we did a practice debate against each other, and we just kept in touch ever since then. So, I mean, this was over a decade ago now. After that, I went to study computer science. So I went to UCLA to study computer science, and I was, I mean, essentially, I am a software engineer by trade. So I ended up getting into crypto back in 2017. At that time, my roommate, he was going through Binance Labs, and we ended up tinkering together on a couple of different projects. And after that, I ended up joining Robinhood. So Robinhood is a US brokerage. It made national, or I guess international news 2 years ago because of the GameStop saga. But yeah, I joined when it was pretty small. I joined when it was around 200 to 250 people. I saw it more than 10x. By the time I left, it was more than 3,000. And yeah, I was initially an engineer, and then I became an engineering lead over there. So overall, got to work on a lot of different things. And I was an engineering lead when the GameStop saga happened back in 2021, right?
Yeah, good time.
Which is totally wild times. Yeah. So for anyone listening in who might not be super familiar, there was this stock called GameStop. I mean, it still exists and it's doing quite well now. There's this company called GameStop, and there were several other companies, like AMC would be another example, but roughly a dozen companies in total. And these weren't like super hot companies, right? These were pretty boring companies that seemed to be on like kind of this decline. And then a bunch of Redditors from Wall Street Bets was the specific subreddit where it initially took off. They just started rallying behind these specific stocks. And it was really interesting because all these people would go, they'd learn about it from Wall Street Bets, then they would open their Robinhood accounts. And a lot of these stocks were being bought through Robinhood. So they would open their Robinhood account, and then they would buy these specific like 12 stocks. And it resulted in the price of stock just like pumping to the moon, right? Kind of what we see with a lot of the meme coins right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we saw these, sorry, go ahead.
I was just about to mention that it was like around a couple of months after like I participated in the market. So it's very wild for me as well to see this phenomena happen, because like I was very new to investment and I would never believe in some kind of like meme power of Reddit.
It's like one thing that really emphasizes that the market truly is irrational in the short term, because the decisions that are being made over there, like when people are just buying, even when it was like I think the peak for a GameStop stock was around $400-500, and it had started off at $5. So even after it had gone up 100x in price, people were still buying it, and that just kind of emphasizes how irrational the markets can be.
Yeah.
And hedge funds were seeing this, right? Like hedge funds are these super sophisticated institutions, and they saw this buy activity happening. They're like, this makes no sense. This is very overvalued, so we're going to short it. So shorting is when you basically say, I bet that the price of that asset is going to go down. And they were betting that the price of the asset is going to go down. The only problem with shorting is that if the stock price starts going up even more, then there's this concept of a short squeeze, where you as an institution, the way shorting works is you borrow an asset, you sell it, and then you buy it back to close a position. So if you want to close your position, you need to buy the asset. So when the stock price is going up, you're losing money, you actually need to buy the asset, which drives up more buy pressure, which drives the price up even higher, and that's called a short squeeze. So there was a short squeeze happening back then, and like these stocks just kept going even higher. Hedge funds like Melvin Capital, for example, they were just getting totally destroyed, and it was an absolutely insane time. Robinhood was a primary place that was benefiting from all of this, right? And then one day, I think it was January 28th, completely out of the blue, Robinhood just turned off all buys on these stocks, and there was essentially no communication to customers on this. Yeah, they're just like zero customer communication. So they were like, yeah, these stocks are volatile. We're not going to let you buy them anymore. The entire country was really mad about this, right? Because this is like a genuine Robinhood moment where like the rich were losing and normal people were beating Wall Street. And then Robinhood was like, nope.
Yes, sir. I was just about to mention that I remember the time where people are getting mad because like what this is kind of like similar to the fight between the retail traders and those hedge funds, right? And this is like kind of like them playing some unfair game to the retailers, and that's kind of like a valid reason why they're mad.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there were a lot of people that were affected by the financial crisis, right? And they largely blamed the institution. So this kind of felt like a way for retail to fight back against the institutions for causing the Great Recession that happened in like 08, 09. And yeah, I mean, Robinhood turned off buys, the entire country was mad. So I was an insider. So a bunch of people reached out to me. I had people that I'd worked with in the past, friends from before. They were super mad, right? They're like, yo, man, what the hell is happening? I had nothing to tell them because leadership completely kept us in the dark. My team had questions. I couldn't really tell them anything either. And when you're in a position like that, you feel just incredibly powerless, right? You feel like you have absolutely no agency because you're part of this company, and this company is making these decisions, but you have no idea how these decisions are being made. You have no power to actually shape any of these decisions. And yeah, I mean, it just really highlights how when you have decentralized systems with like two dudes in a room that are calling the shots, it can just be really, really bad for the community. So after going through that experience, I became much more of a decentralization maxi. Like anything that happens in a decentralized way is inherently trustless. Whereas in Robinhood's case, you needed to trust Vlad and Beju to do the right thing. And yeah, that's why back in 2021, my co-founder and I, we started to build a decentralized exchange. We thought that would resolve a lot of the issues that Robinhood was facing. This led to us looking into all the infrastructure we could use to build an exchange. So looked at every layer 1, every layer 2, ultimately decided that the infrastructure was lacking. And that led to us building SEI. So SEI is a general purpose and permissionless layer 1, where we've optimized every single part of the stack for trading applications.
I see it. That was an interesting background because like most people from what I heard like they believe in DEX because they just believe in decentralization, but in your case, a special case where you actually face the problem with centralization itself. So yeah, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, we see this repeatedly, right? Like we've seen it again with 3AC, for example, FTX, for example. So I think it's a genuine problem that's going to keep presenting itself until we start making use of more decentralized systems.
Cool. Let me recap the whole introduction in Thai to the Thai audience a bit ครับก็ตะกี้ผมคุยกับเจนะครับเกี่ยวกับเรื่องแบ็กกราวด์เขาเนาะก็คือเขาก็ประสบการณ์โชคโชนมากนะครับก็เขาทำงานมาเขาจบ CS นะครับหมายถึงคอมพิวเตอร์ไซน์เป็นเดฟนะครับจบที่ UCLA เนาะก็ทำมานานพอสมควรนะครับแล้วหลังจากนั้นเขาก็เริ่มทำงานทีเนี้ยที่เขาทำงานเขาก็ทำงานฝั่ง Engineering ในฝั่งของ Robinhood เนาะแล้วเขาบอกว่าสาเหตุที่เขามาทำ DEX เนี่ยเพราะว่าตอนที่เขาทำงาน Robinhood แล้วเจอปัญหา GameStop เนี่ยเขาค่อนข้างไม่พอใจกับการที่มันมี ช่วงที่เขาสั่งปิดออเดอร์นะหมายถึงว่ามันจะมีช่วงหนึ่งที่มันเกิดการช็อตสควีซจนแบบโรบินฮูดเนี่ยให้แบบสั่งไม่ให้มีการซื้ออะให้ขายได้อย่างเดียวอะไรเงี้ยเขาก็รู้สึกว่าไม่ค่อยพอใจที่แบบเฮ้ยทำไมแบบระบบที่มัน centralize ถึงสามารถถูกเอ่อก่อกวนทำให้แบบคนมันเสียเปรียบได้ขนาดนี้ทั้งที่จริงๆอะฝั่ง retail เขากำลังจะสู้กับฝั่ง hedge fund หรืออะไรเงี้ยผมว่าก็เป็น motivation ที่ดีนะทำให้เขาแบบมาสนใจในมุมของ decentralization เพราะว่าเวลาเราพูดถึงแบบคนที่อินกับ DEX อะไรเงี้ยเราก็จะเคยได้ยินแต่เรื่องเล่าอะไรว่าแบบ decentralization มันสำคัญยังไงแต่กรณีของเจเนี่ยผมว่าน่าสนใจอย่างหนึ่งตรงที่เขาแบบ build สิ่งนี้เพราะว่าเขาเจอกับสิ่งหนึ่งมาเองอะไรเงี้ยครับก็เป็นอีกหนึ่งสิ่งที่น่าสนใจนะครับ Okay, great. So, I heard you mention about say a bit that is like decentralization on Cosmos, right? And I just talked with you before going live here about like what's your protocol pronouns, because like we have many people trying to call you like say, and so on and
Yeah,
so forth. Like, can you tell me some origin about your names and what protocol does?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we picked the name Say, so it's pronounced Say. Like you can think of the English word say, like he is saying something. So you can pronounce it Say. And in terms of the origin for the name,
Mhm.
it comes from the name of a Norwegian whale. So
Mm.
there's this Norwegian whale that is one of the fastest whales in the world. It also lives very deep in the water. So through a combination of whale, deep liquidity, and speed, that's why we
Ah.
ended up picking the name Say, because Say is meant to be an ecosystem that's focused on trading. There
Mhm.
will be a lot of liquidity, and there will be, I mean, even right now, there is the fastest block times out there, fastest time to
Mhm.
finality. So yeah, it was a play on words around that.
Mhm. Cool. That's like good like naming concepts because like wells, liquidities, deep. Yeah. That's a very good
Yeah,
name. Kudos you for coming up with this name.
thank you.
Cool. Um, and the last introduction question. Uh, Say tokens like going live very soon, right? On Binance Launch Pool. Can you tell us something about like Say token? How kind of like Say tokens work? How things around like utility is also forth. Can you give us some
Mhm.
introduction about Say token?
Yeah, so I mean, just one thing to clarify before getting into that is I'm
Mhm.
associated with Say Labs. We're building the open source software in the US. Say Foundation is running everything for the Say token. So I'll just give the best insights that I have, and
Cool.
Say Foundation could really provide more clarity there. So
Mhm.
anyway, Say is a layer one blockchain, and
Mhm.
similar to every other layer one blockchain, Say will be having a utility token that is
Mhm.
used for reasons essentially identical to Ethereum, Solana, or any other major L1 you can think of. So
Mhm.
the biggest utilities are going to be tied to staking. So you can
Mhm.
stake the token to help secure the network.
Mhm.
Say uses delegated proof of stake. So results in this can result in slashing conditions if any validators misbehave. So it helps secure the network. The
Mhm.
second thing is around transaction fees. So whenever you submit a transaction, there will be gas fees associated with it.
Mhm.
So this will be used to help pay for gas. The third major utility is around governance. So governance proposals will be enabled from the start, and you will need state tokens to be able to engage in governance.
Mhm.
Beyond that, there will also be a global fee market. So in line with transaction fees, there will also be this concept of paying additional fees to get your transaction prioritized. And then Say
Mm.
token will also be useful in any applications built on top. So if there's, for example, a lending market, you can deposit the Say token as collateral and then do whatever you need to in the protocol. So I would say those are the five major use cases.
Cool. Before we go into like deeper question, let me like recap all this in Thai before we go full on English mode โอเคนะครับ
Okay.
ก็ Say นะครับจะเป็นตัวโปรโตคอลนะครับที่เป็นเป็น DEX เนาะที่อยู่บน Cosmos อันนี้ทุกคนน่าจะพอรู้อยู่แล้วนะครับซึ่งจริงๆSCI ไม่ได้อ่านว่า SEI เซยหรือว่าอะไรนะพอดีคือมาเห็นมันเพิ่งมีซุยอะไรเงี้ยแล้วแบบเห็นคล้ายๆกันก็เลยอ่านเซย yeah just fun thing because like during the time you were like getting more recognized in Thai, it's during the time where Sui come in. And when there's like a similar name with Sui and like Sui, and people like very confusing about how we should pronounce you.
Yeah. Sorry for that. We picked the name, and then afterwards we saw the suite announcements, and we're like, okay, this is going to be definitely a little confusing for folks. But yeah, hopefully not too bad.
Yeah, not too bad cool ครับก็ตัว Say เนี่ยคืออ่านว่า Say นะครับแบบ SAY ที่แปลว่าพูดภาษาอังกฤษเนี่ย Say เนี่ยก็เขากำลังจะออกโทเค็นเร็วๆนี้เนาะบน Binance Launch Pool อะนะฮะซึ่งตะกี้ผมก็ถามไปอะครับว่าตัว Say เนี่ยจะเป็นยังไงบ้างโทเค็นเป็นยังไงแล้วมันเกี่ยวข้องกับโปรโตคอลยังไงครับสิ่งที่เขาพูดมาเนี่ยก็จะมีประมาณว่าหนึ่งคือจริงๆก็เป็นแบบ typical Cosmos Tendermint อะเนาะก็คือเขาสามารถ stake เพื่อเป็นความปลอดภัยของเน็ตเวิร์กได้นะครับจ่ายเป็นแก๊สฟรีนะครับมีในส่วนของtoken utility ในฝั่งของคือกรณีที่บางทีเราจ่าย transaction อะไรเงี้ยเราอยากจะ boost transaction ก็จ่ายเป็นแก๊สได้เนาะมีส่วนของการที่เราจะนำมาใช้ในการ utility อื่นในกรณีที่มี dApp รองรับในอนาคตตัวอย่างเช่นแบบหาก market cap โตสูงพอ market cap โตสูงพอเนี่ย เราอาจจะสามารถนำเซไป collateral บนเชนบนแบบ lending market อื่นหรืออะไรอย่างนี้ได้เหมือนกันในอนาคตอย่างเงี้ยนะครับและก็จะมีเป็น utility อื่นๆนะครับสำหรับในอนาคตเนาะเพิ่มเติมนะครับก็หลักๆเนี่ย Sei token ก็จะเป็น utility token ของ Sei เพื่อที่จะทำให้โปรโตคอลเนี่ยสามารถเดินหน้าทำ governance vote ใช้เป็น gas fee บน layer 1อะไรอย่างนี้ได้ทั้งคู่นะครับ โอเคก็อันนี้นะครับก็จะเป็นเกี่ยวกับเซกว้างๆเนาะเดี๋ยวหลังจากนี้เนี่ยจะเป็นในส่วนของ AMA พาร์ทของ question ต่างๆนะครับที่มีทางผมเตรียมไว้แล้วเดี๋ยวจะมีให้ทางบ้านสอบถามมานะครับก็ในกรณีที่ฟังไม่ทันหรือภาษาอังกฤษอะไรก็สามารถพิมพ์ถามได้นะครับเรามีคนคอยช่วยตอบอยู่เสมอนะครับเป็นหลังบ้านเนาะก็ขอบคุณทีมงานหลังบ้านทุกคนด้วยนะครับโอเค so let's get started on the detailed question about like deep dive how say works. This is gonna be some interesting section from now on, right? So let's go through the very first question. Everyone's now already know because like it's publicly known that say is building on Cosmos Tendermint, right? Can you give us some like explanation on why you choose Cosmos over like let's say Ethereum layer 2 or like Polkadot or like some other ecosystem out there? Because like currently there's tons of L1s, tons of L2s, and like tons of choice you can deploy on decentralized network. Why do you choose Cosmos Tendermint specifically?
Yeah. So I guess taking maybe a step back and like thinking about this at a higher level, like what is it we're trying to do, right? Internally, we have one core thesis, which is that the exchange of digital assets is the most fundamental use case for blockchains. Every single successful application in crypto right now is either directly or indirectly a trading application. So I mean, let's look at some examples, right? Like if you look at Uniswap, it allows you to trade spot assets, so that's very clearly an exchange. If you look at OpenSea, it lets you swap NFTs. It lets you trade NFTs. So that is also very directly a trading application. Even STEPN, right? STEPN is a game. But one of the major components of STEPN is this in-game marketplace. And that's true for a lot of successful crypto games. So games are also trading applications. If you look at Aave, right? So Aave, you would be able to deposit and then borrow money to be able to use for anything that you want to. And the primary use case that people have for borrowing money is to then be able to go and trade it somewhere. So Aave indirectly is also a trading application. Even MetaMask, like people install it and then they go and do things on chain. But the primary things they do on chain is they go and trade it somewhere. So everything in crypto right now is either directly or indirectly a trading application. And it's becoming clear that there's more tailwinds that are going to make on-chain trading activity even more common. One reason is because there's just, like, if you look in the past 5 years, there's been a massive explosion in the amount of trading activity and just on-chain activity that is happening because more and more people are becoming crypto educated and more people are becoming crypto savvy. So there's just organic trends that are pushing that forward anyway. And there's also regulation that is going to result in more on-chain activity. Because what we saw happening with FTX and a lot of stablecoins resulted in just a lot of regulatory scrutiny from especially the United States government. And this is going to result in some of the centralized exchange activity not being able to happen on centralized entities anymore. So that'll need to start flowing on-chain and through decentralized venues instead. So I mean, all of that is to say that trading applications are important. Trading applications are increasingly becoming more important. But then right now they can't really scale. So That's what we spend all of our time at SEI thinking about. How do we solve the exchange scaling problem? The core promise that we make to teams is that you can focus on user acquisition because that is fundamentally the most important thing that matters for any teams, for any projects. And SEI can focus on building the best infrastructure for you. So with that being said, your question was around like why we decided to build our own chain instead of building some other type of infrastructure. When we got started, we considered the different alternatives. So one of the alternatives was to build a rollup. And we can do much more of a deep dive into rollups if helpful. But the fundamental issue that we saw is that rollups do not scale. If you try to build a rollup on Ethereum right now, you need to write compressed transaction data. So the way rollups work is you have off-chain computation, you do a bunch of stuff off-chain, you take all those transactions, you compress them, and then you write them to Ethereum. And writing them to Ethereum ends up being the major bottleneck here because it's really expensive to do that. So if you do the math, if every single transaction in the Ethereum L1 block was used exclusively for rollups, you'd be able to get an upper bound of around 6,000 transactions that could be fit into one block. But in reality, there's a lot of other stuff going on, right? There's people using the L1 for like Uniswap and Blur and OpenSea and all of that. So if you look at actual throughput numbers for layer 2s, they're getting like in the order of dozens of TPS. They're like not even typically at 100 TPS, which there are some initiatives from the Ethereum Foundation to improve that, which we can go into if relevant, but we just don't fundamentally think it's going to be scalable with Ethereum. So then the other thing that we considered was building on top of some kind of shared security system. But we realized very quickly on that we wanted to start having modifications of the consensus layer. So we wanted to have faster time to finality, different consensus mechanisms. And if shared security is being used, you're really at the mercy of whoever the validator set is and whatever the kind of protocol is that determines how consensus improvements can actually happen. So that's why we decided to build our own layer 1. And then, I mean, even then, there's like 2 different ways you can build an L1. You can either build everything from scratch. And that runs into, I mean, first of all, it takes a bunch of time to like reinvent the wheel around like around cryptography, consensus, like all these major components that you would need to rebuild. So that part is definitely quite time consuming, and it's also error prone, right? Like whenever you see a new network that is completely built from scratch, there's a massive blast radius around the types of errors you can get. And the alternative would be to use something like Cosmos SDK, where they've already built most of it for you. It's already quite battle tested. It has several years of usage. So the blast scope is a lot lower. The amount of work it takes to get something working is a lot lower. And then afterwards, it's very modular. So you can change out the parts that you don't really need or that you need to improve. So that was the inspiration to originally start using like the Cosmos SDK. Since then, I mean, I wouldn't even say that we're a Cosmos chain at this point because we've completely modified the Cosmos SDK. Like we have our own custom fork. We've modified Tendermint. We have we just created a completely new consensus mechanism called Twin Turbo Consensus. So we've completely modified those parts of the stack, and most of our activity isn't going to be multi-chain activity. It's actually going to be isolated to the layer 1 itself, just based off the testnet activity that we've seen. So yeah, I would say at this point, we're much more of a fully sovereign layer 1, similar to Aptos, Solana, Sui type of chains.
I see. Okay, this is very new for me. Because like it is also like a very cool motivation on your side as well. Because like as an L2 researchers, I have never like interviewed most of dApps why they choose to build apart from like layer 2, and this one is kind of like a very interesting motivation because like it's a very fair point to say that block space is limited, and somehow you can scale the block space although how much data you compress. In the end, it's gonna reach about upper bound, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely initiatives by the Ethereum Foundation to improve that, such as proto-dank sharding, dank sharding that we can get into as well. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it's just not scalable.
I see. Would love to talk to you more about that, but if I talk to you more about this is not gonna be a SEI AMA, right? so
Fair
yeah,
enough, fair enough.
yeah, fair enough. So just like question to follow up about your answer here. You mentioned that you tweak your Tendermint's consensus a bit so that you make your say chain more sovereignty, right?
Mm-hmm.
My question is that will your say chain still supports IBC transfer between the different Tendermint channel?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for listeners, I mean, IBC is the Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol.
Mm-hmm.
It lets you basically send arbitrary data packets between different blockchains. And in the biggest use case right now is to bridge assets. So say we'll be supporting IBC from day one. And the reason for that is the parts around Tendermint consensus related to the light client implementation and related to, I guess, all the logic that IBC needs. That part was not changed. But more the changes that were made were around block propagation and block processing, because we basically saw like, okay, what are all the inefficiencies happening around having larger time to finality? And we just figured out how we can bring that to be as low as possible. Because at the end of the day, one of the biggest factors in a good user experience is really fast response times. If it's a really slow response time, like in the case of Ethereum L1, then it leads to a much clunkier user experience. If you look at like Amazon, for example, they've optimized every single part of Amazon.com so that there's the snappiest user response times that are possible, because in Web2, they've done a bunch of research around this. And the longer something takes to do, the less likely the user is to follow through on it. So if it takes like more than, let's say, 500 milliseconds, the user might mentally just check out. They might be like, okay, what am I going to have for dinner today? If it takes more than like a second or a second and a half, then users often just switch to a different tab entirely, and then they don't finish that flow, which is incredible that like in Web2, they've done all this research. And then in Web3, it's like just acceptable. Like, okay, submit this transaction. It'll take like 15, 20 seconds to show something on your screen. It'll take a couple minutes for it to be finalized. Like that's definitely not the world that we were imagining in the future. And that's why we decided to really focus on the time to finality aspect of it. And right now, Say is the fastest chain in terms of time to finality. We're the only chain that made use of twin turbo consensus. So yeah, that helps significantly. And we're, as a result, also able to get 400 millisecond time to finality, which is like 10x faster than chains like Solana and Sui, for example.
That's a pretty cool thing to do, because like, to be honest, like I actually do research a lot of like L2s. Most of them are like focusing around like trying to make compression or AKA proof more, let's say, decentralized, more efficient. So like from what I researched, just like not so much people trying to work on like shorter finality.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like cool to see someone actually like focusing on this point and actually like make some progress out of it. So
yeah,
kudos to you guys as well.
I think
like,
long term, this is going to be super important for the industry, because all of these rollups that you're talking about, they all use a centralized sequencer right now. So they have just like one node that is servicing these requests. And I mean, that's not the vision that any of them have like for the future. So like everyone's going to need to figure out how to have a decentralized validator set or a decentralized sequencer set. So everyone is going to run into these same problems around like optimizing time to finality.
Yeah. Because like the finality issue and the block reorg stuff is kind of like one of the one of the main pain points in blockchain, and it's one of the, I'm not sure if I can say it, but yeah, it's one of the reasons why Polygon doesn't draw as much attention to their like chains as well. Yeah. So yeah, cool to see you guys working on this. Yeah. So let's move on to the next question. Like we know that what's like your motivation and what's like your reason behind choosing the Cosmos Tendermint consensus, right? But my question that I want to follow up after that is that so we're currently like mainly comparing about ETH ecosystem and the Cosmos ecosystem, right? The main drawbacks about like building on Tendermint, although like you can allow to have like some customization and L1 sovereignty, like what you have on Cosmos chain right now, right? One of the main drawback is that there's very different in liquidity size between like Ethereum and Cosmos. What's your opinion on like this different in liquidity? Do you think this is kind of like a solvable problem, or it's kind of like the thing that, because like it's kind of like an egg or chicken question, like whether the users come first, then liquidity come next, or liquidity come first, then users come next. So what's like your opinion on this thing when you compare between like ETH rollups which have a lot of liquidity but can't scale compared to the Cosmos ecosystem where you can scale but the liquidity will come afterwards.
Yeah. So I guess just one thing to reemphasize is that SEI is not a Cosmos chain. SEI is a fully sovereign chain. So this would be more of like a external take on Cosmos versus Ethereum. And I mean, to be completely candid, I think that the way that a lot of crypto projects get started building is the wrong way to build. Like, I mean, I grew up in Silicon Valley, right? And in Silicon Valley, there's this obsessive focus on building things that people want. Like Y Combinator, which is one of the biggest accelerators out here, they keep re-emphasizing that, like build things that people want. And the companies that typically get built in Silicon Valley, they're building technology to solve some user problem. In crypto, it doesn't often feel that way. In crypto, it often feels like people are building technology for the sake of building technology. And any business that is built that way, I don't think it's going to work. In SEI's case, the core problem that we want to solve is how do we facilitate the exchange of digital assets in the simplest way possible? And I mean, in the case of a lot of other projects, it just honestly, as I mentioned before, it just feels like technology for the sake of technology. So in terms of Cosmos versus Ethereum, I think that the biggest issue that the Cosmos ecosystem has run into so far is there hasn't been it's been more of like building technology. In some ways, it feels like to build technology versus building technology to solve a massive user problem. And I think that's one thing that the Ethereum ecosystem has done better so far. And that's kind of a roundabout way of saying that I think that the Ethereum business development so far has been better than the business development that has been happening in the Cosmos ecosystem, which is why Ethereum has been more successful than the Cosmos ecosystem, even though both of them have been around for quite a while now. And in terms of which approach I think is going to end up doing better, I think that for both of them, they're going to be building infrastructure that is very interesting, especially if you have application-specific rollups versus application-specific chains. In terms of the user flows, it's not that different. Like you still have to bridge from some chain that has liquidity into this new chain. In terms of the bridges, there'll be different types of bridges. One might be a trust minimized bridge. One might be like a normal bridge. Normal users don't give a shit about that, right? Normal users don't understand any of the mechanics around like having a trust minimized bridge versus not. And the reason that normal users go to any ecosystem is because they just think that it's hype. They think that there's some cool thing to do in that ecosystem. And that's what makes them go through this entire friction flow of like installing MetaMask and like opening a centralized exchange account and then sending money to Ethereum and then sending it to whatever this new chain is. That's the primary thing that makes users scared, just like some cool stuff to be doing. As a result, I think that the ecosystem that will end up winning is the one that is the one that'll do better ecosystem building and better community development. I think historically that has been Ethereum so far because it is a general purpose chain. So everything that is built in the Ethereum ecosystem is part of Team Ethereum, and they all help Ethereum succeed. I don't know if that'll continue when there's a bunch of different rollups that are competing against one another. So I don't actually know if the application-specific rollup approach is going to be that successful for Ethereum. But the issue that the Cosmos has run into so far is it's a bunch of separate application-specific chains that are fairly sovereign. Like they're not in any way like built on the same base chain or anything. And the result of that is that there's a lot more infighting and there's a lot more every man for himself mentality versus having like everyone be part of Team Cosmos and helping Cosmos somehow succeed. So yeah, like I guess the shorter answer to your question is I think whoever is able to get more interesting applications will end up winning in the longer term.
Yeah. One thing I want to like add in addition to what you just put in is that, and in addition to what you just mentioned is that I think the another issue with the blockchain is the UX problem as well. In addition to like those of like amazing application, I think like those who wins users experience battle will definitely win. And currently, as you say, Web3 UX has been like down to the drain. Haven't been like very bad. So yeah, that's kind of like an interesting take. Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that because if you talk to developers, the biggest thing that they care about is user experience in terms of the infrastructure that they're built on, because good UX leads to much easier user acquisition, and projects are only successful if they're able to acquire users. So that is the primary thing that we're really focused on from Jay's side. We understand that right now the user experience around exchanging digital assets is incredibly clunky. So how do we make that experience better? And that's the biggest thing that we're focused on. And the reason that I think a lot of teams have been bought into what Say is doing is because a lot of the technical advancements that we're making, they're part of this broader vision that we want to help enable a better user experience. So all the things that we're building around parallelization, around consensus improvements, in the future around zero knowledge light clients, all of these things, each in like, they're independently all very big technical problems. Other chains might be focused entirely, like that's their entire product. They're building a let's say a parallelized blockchain, for example. That's the problem that they're solving, and that is the product that they end up building. In Say's case, the problem that we're solving is around the user experience, and the product that we end up building ends up having a lot of these different components that are part of it. And I think that's like the approach that we're taking there in terms of focusing on this user experience has really resonated with teams. And I mean, long term, the world that we imagine is one where the experience of using crypto, like going to Uniswap and placing a trade, will be identical to that of going to Amazon.com and trying to buy something from there. Because right now it's like a fundamentally different experience. It's just incredibly, like the crypto experience is so much worse than like the Web2 experience right now. 5 years from now, we think the experiences can be very similar to each other. Maybe not exactly the same because you still have to go through global consensus, but as close to similar as possible. And we have ideas for how to keep decreasing the time to finality and keep improving the user experience as well.
Yeah, cool. Before we continue, let me like recap this entire again, because like I just look at the comment and I saw too many Thai comments, so I feel like a bit uncomfortable to like go on in full English mode. So it
for sure.
won't be long, but yeah, I'll try to recap everything in Thai as fast as possible. Cool. ครับก็ตะกี้ก็ ภาษาอังกฤษยาวหน่อยนะคือตอนแรกไม่คิดว่าแบบจะมีคนไทยคิดว่าจะมีคนอังกฤษมาดูปนด้วยเยอะอะไรอย่างเงี้ยนะแต่พอดีผมเป็นคนไทยเยอะก็เลยเดี๋ยวขอเบรกหน่อยแล้วกันแล้วเดี๋ยวอธิบายเป็นภาษาไทยนิดนึงนะครับคือคิดว่าหลายคนก็คงมีจุดประสงค์ในการเข้ามาอยู่แล้วนะแต่ว่าอย่างน้อยอยากให้ได้อะไรกลับไปบ้างแล้วกันนะฮะก็คือผมถามไป 2-3 อย่างนะครับส่วนแรกก็คือผมถามเกี่ยวกับตัว Cosmos Tendermint นะฮะว่าคือเราได้ยินมานะครับว่า Say เนี่ยเขา deploy บน Tendermint เนาะคือหลายคนอาจจะคิดว่าเอ้ยแปลว่า Say เนี่ยอยู่ใต้ Cosmos หรือเปล่าหรืออะไรเงี้ยจริงๆแล้วคือ Say เขาเป็นเชนเดี่ยวๆนะแต่คือหลักการทำงานของ Cosmos เนี่ยของ Tendermint เนี่ยมันไม่ได้แปลว่าการที่เชนหนึ่งเนี่ยจะใช้ Tendermint แปลว่าเชนนี้อยู่ใน Cosmos แต่ว่าคือหลักๆเนี่ยการที่เขาใช้ Tendermint เนี่ยเขามีตัวโทเค็น Say ของเขาเองนะครับที่เขาสามารถรัน validator node สามารถมี validator เองได้เหมือนกันนะครับแล้วก็ในอีกข้อดีหนึ่งคือเราสามารถทำ IBC หมายถึงว่าสามารถสื่อสารกับตัวบล็อกเชนที่ใช้Tendermint ได้เหมือนกันนะครับตัวอย่างเช่นแบบพวกตระกูลOsmosis หรืออะไรเงี้ยเราก็สามารถแบบส่งข้อความไปมาได้นะครับอันนี้คือข้อดีแต่สิ่งที่น่าสนใจเกี่ยวกับ Say เนี่ยคือเขาบอกว่าสาเหตุที่เขาไม่ได้เลือก roll ups หรือแบบพวก Ethereum layer to scaling เนี่ยเพราะว่ามันมีปัญหาเรื่อง block space นะหมายถึงว่าคือสิ่งที่สุดท้ายแล้วสิ่งที่ layer 2 ทำครับคือเขาต้องการที่จะรวม transaction หลายๆก้อนบีบให้เล็กลงแล้วเอาลง layer 1เนาะแต่ว่าปัญหาของสิ่งนี้ครับคือต่อให้เราบีบข้อมูลเยอะแค่ไหนเนี่ยมันก็ยังจำกัดจำนวน roll up ที่สามารถใช้ได้อยู่ดีไงลองคิดสภาพว่า Ethereum เนี่ยเป็นเหมือนกล่อง1กล่องเนาะเป็นบล็อก1บล็อกที่เราจะต้องเติม transaction เข้าไปไม่ว่าจะบีบ transaction ของ roll up ไปเยอะแค่ไหนเนี่ยสุดท้ายมันก็ยังจำกัดอยู่แค่กล่องนี้เนี่ยเขาเลยบอกว่าจริงๆการ deploy บน Ethereum เนี่ยมันก็ไม่ได้ scale แล้วมันยังมีปัญหาเรื่องของแบบfinality ที่ใช้อีกประมาณว่ามันต้องรอสักพักนึงก่อนที่มันจะแบบ blockchain มันจะธุรกรรมถึงจะไปต่อได้นะครับซึ่งสิ่งที่ทาง Say ทำเนี่ยคือเขาก็เลยเลือกที่จะไปทางฝั่งของ Cosmos เนาะที่สามารถสร้าง consensus ทำเป็น layer 1ของตัวเองแต่ว่าไม่ต้อง build จากศูนย์เลยคือไปใช้เทมเพลตของ Tendermint จาก Cosmos มานะครับจากนั้นเนี่ยสิ่งที่เขาทำคือเขาไปปรับแต่งนะครับตัว Cosmos เนี่ยให้มันมีประสิทธิภาพสูงขึ้นจนแบบ finality time เนี่ยเขาเหลืออยู่ที่ประมาณ400มิลลิเซกนะครับซึ่งเกือบจะสปีดขึ้น10เท่าอะไรเงี้ยซึ่งอันนี้ก็คือสุดยอดมากๆเลยนะครับอันนี้หมายความว่ายังไงหมายความว่าจริงๆแล้ว Say เนี่ยเป็น layer 1 blockchain นะครับที่ใช้ Cosmos ที่ใช้ Tendermint consensus เหมือน Cosmos แต่ไม่ได้อยู่ในไม่ได้เป็นของ Cosmos นะคือแยกกันแต่แค่ใช้ของที่ Cosmos เขาสร้างมาใช้ต่อเฉยๆนะซึ่ง เป็น layer 1ที่ใช้สำหรับการเป็น DEX โดยเฉพาะหรือว่าเป็น exchange ที่แบบ decentralized เนาะสามารถทำให้เราแลกเปลี่ยนสินค้าอะไรต่างๆกันได้นะครับทีนี้คำถามต่อมาที่ผมถามเนี่ยก็คือประมาณว่าเนี่ยคือเขาดูเหมือนจะต้องเลือกเนาะระหว่าง L2 ที่มีสภาพคล่องเยอะมีการเงินหมุนเวียนอยู่เยอะเทียบกับCosmos Tendermint เนี่ยที่มันมีเรียกว่าอะไรที่มันมีสภาพคล่องไม่เยอะแล้วกันแต่ว่าเขาสามารถปรับแต่งอะไรได้เยอะกว่าคือเวลาเราทำบน roll up เนี่ยเราต้องทำใจอย่างหนึ่งว่าเราเนี่ยจะต้องใช้ได้แค่แบบ ETH scaling เนาะเราปรับแต่งอะไรได้เยอะไม่ได้เพราะสุดท้ายมันต้องมา settle บน ETH ทำอะไรหลายๆอย่างบน ETH อะไรอย่างเงี้ยเขาบอกว่าจริงๆแล้วทั้งหมดที่เขาพยายามจะทำเนี่ยคือเขาพยายามที่จะทำให้ปัญหาของ user มันหายไปหมายถึงว่า user มีปัญหาแหละเขาต้องการทำให้ UX ของ user ดีขึ้นนะครับเขาก็เลยที่พยายามที่จะทำสิ่งนี้เขาเชื่อว่าแบบสุดท้ายแล้วเขาไม่ได้แบบ concern เรื่องอื่นๆหรอกเพราะว่าสุดท้ายแล้วถ้าแบบในระยะยาวถ้าระบบมันดีกว่าเขาสามารถทำให้ระบบเนี้ยมันดีกว่า L2 roll up ได้อะไรเงี้ยคนก็จะหันมาใช้ของเขาอยู่ดีนะเพราะว่าเขาบอกว่าปัญหาของ Web3 ส่วนใหญ่คือเหมือนแบบเวลาเราจะเริ่มธุรกิจเนาะคือใน Web2 เนี่ยเขาจะย้ำกันเยอะเสมอมากว่าแบบอย่าเริ่มจากเทคให้เริ่มจากปัญหาแล้วค่อยเอาเทคมาแก้อะไรเงี้ยแต่ว่าแบบเวลาเขาเห็น Web3 ที่สร้างขึ้นมาหลายๆโปรโตคอลเนี่ยมันดูเริ่มจากแบบเทคก่อนตลอดเลยอย่างเงี้ยซึ่งทางเซเนี่ยเขาต้องการที่จะทำตัวโปรโตคอลของเขาเนี่ยให้ตอบโจทย์ยูเซอร์ที่ดีที่สุดด้วยการแก้ปัญหาที่ยูเซอร์เจอด้วยเทคโนโลยีที่ถูกต้องที่สุดนะครับเลยออกมาเป็นเซนั่นเองนะครับก็ใครมีคำถามอะไรถามมาได้นะครับถ้าเกิดแบบมีอะไรระหว่างทางหรือผมพูดเร็วไปซึ่งปกติผมเป็นคนพูดเร็วอยู่แล้วนะ ถ้าแบบมีคำถามอะไรก็พิมพ์มาได้นะครับเดี๋ยวผมจะพยายามทยอยแอบถามเขาให้ระหว่างนี้แล้วก็ตอบให้นะฮะโอเค alright Jay just finish the translation let's move on to the next question more specifically about say cool so we see a lot of like layer 1 decentralized exchange well typically not layer 1 because like one of the most well-known decentralized exchange at the moment is DYDX, right? Technically they are not layer 1, they are currently layer 2s on built on top of StarkX, right? But they're
Yeah.
kind of like transitioning into Cosmos based chain. Let's say Tendermint based chain. Cosmos based is not a good word. Okay, and then we have like some other like competitors that are trying to build like decentralized exchange. Like you see some Arbitrum, I can't remember the name, I'm not sure, GMX, but they're building perps, right? We have like some, I can't remember the name, like Firefly, if I remember. It's kind of like layer 1 DEX on Polkadot. We have a lot like DEX on multiple chains, multiple rollups. Can you explain what makes what makes say what's like the thing that makes say outstanding compared to other decks? What's your pain point? What's your like what's your like strong point of on building decks?
Yeah, it's interesting. The alternatives that you mentioned, I mean, first of all, Say is not building a DEX. We're only building the general purpose infrastructure to support DEXs. So we're not at all competitive with the projects like DYDX you mentioned. If anything, DYDX can build on top of us in the future if they realize that it's a lot of work to be both maintaining an app chain or an application plus the layer 1 itself. And in general, I mean, the specific examples you brought up, like this idea of having a application specific DEX L1 or just application specific DEX infrastructure, we are pretty opinionated against that. We do not think that is the right way to build a product or to build infrastructure for multiple reasons. Like one of the biggest reasons is around ecosystem building. If you try to build your application specific chain, it's much harder to grow an ecosystem and have the kind of social coordination that you would see with the general purpose chain. Like if you look at the biggest projects out there, they're essentially all general purpose chains, like Ethereum, Solana, for example, even Polygon. Like all of these projects, they've been able to grow communities because everyone is on like Team Polygon and they all help that ecosystem succeed versus being very fragmented and competitive. The second thing is, while we do think that like application specific chains will have better infrastructure because you're literally building that infrastructure for one specific use case, we think that because it's so fragmented and disjointed, it's going to make it much harder to acquire users. Both from the, as we were talking before, around the ecosystem building standpoint, and also from the second thing would be around liquidity attracting standpoint, because it's just a much clunkier process to bring on liquidity if it's just one use case in that chain. And the third thing would be around composability. if you are built on top of a general purpose chain and you have an exchange, then that liquidity can be used for other things as well. Once you have these LP tokens, you can deposit them into projects that are built on that ecosystem, and it can be done in a very simple and clean way. Whereas if it's all fragmented, then you have to bridge it to another ecosystem. There's trust guarantees that you need to get around with that. There's latency that you have to get around with that. It just becomes a much more complicated kind of problem to have composability if you're building your own separate infrastructure.
I see. So say it's more kind of like infrastructure for other to build up on top, right?
Exactly. We are a completely general purpose permissionless chain. We are not building any applications ourselves. We are only building the infrastructure similar to Ethereum or Solana.
I see. Because like most people when they like try to skim through your page, they kind of like get some sense that it's similar to Dex, but it's actually like a layer one chain that optimized specifically for a specific execution with which support. It's kind of
Exactly.
like a decentralized trading format, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of like the idea of modularization stacks.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about modularization, like modular blockchains as well. We disagree with those as well. But yeah, like we're not building the application ourselves. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that is there about Say. I would say that there's two major misconceptions. The first is that exactly that Say is building a DEX. We're not building a DEX. It's actually, in our viewpoint, very like a terrible strategic decision to be building a DEX. Because if we build an application ourselves, then suddenly there's no longer credible neutrality. Any other project that wants to deploy on Say would then have to compete against the core application that Say itself is building, right? And that is just a very lose-lose, like it's a very losing proposition for any teams that would want to build. And I think other projects that have tried to go from application specific to becoming more general purpose, that doesn't work out very well for them because they already have this application in their ecosystem. And whenever there's like any competition for block space or any kind of competition for maybe rewards from the ecosystem, there's always the concern from ecosystem projects that like, oh, we have to compete against the core application for the team. So I would say that's one of the misconceptions, and we definitely disagree with the approach of building an application on top of the L1 and trying to grow that into a general purpose ecosystem. The other major misconception that people often have about Say is that Say is purely a DeFi focused chain. That is absolutely not the case either. Say is a general purpose chain, and we're focused on building the best infrastructure for trading applications. And trading applications, as we were talking about before, they're ubiquitous. They're there in every single type of application in crypto right now. Like every crypto application is a trading application. Therefore, Say is building the most general purpose ecosystem out there.
Yeah, because like at first when I mentioned modularization, I was like thinking about the motivation of how modularization actually works, because like when we talk about modularization, we talk about like we always mention things like you can actually solve things with just a monolith architectures. What I found interesting, like and it and makes me think of like modularization is the fact that you are not solving the whole trading problem alone. You're trying to frame specifically on the infrastructure for trading, and then you make these stacks itself like as powerful as possible, and let others build on top of you guys.
Exactly. So that mental model, I think, is exactly right. We're building this basic infrastructure, and we support some additional functionality for exchanges. And in that sense, it is modular. But we're not taking the approach of like splitting out data availability from the core layer one. We think that approach leads to, it's unnecessarily complex, and it leads to more issues as well.
I see. Okay. Can you like give some high level example of how your infrastructure can facilitate dApps builder to like build on your Say chain? Like for example, if we like compare, let's say building on top of like Arbitrum and on Say, how your infrastructure like benefits the builders in the way that you expect? That can you like give some high level example for users?
Yeah. So when we got started building, we explored the layer ones and layer twos that were there at the time. So layer ones we were looking at were Ethereum, Solana. Afterwards, Aptos, since we became quite popular as well. And then we also looked at layer 2s like Arbitrum, Optimism. In terms of layer 2s, the biggest downside there is around scalability. Like, I mean, they just can't scale. So trying to have any kind of sophisticated exchange that supports hundreds of transactions or thousands of transactions per second, that's just not possible on Arbitrum or on Optimism. So if you're trying to build a trading application that needs to scale, it's just not possible on L2s right now. If you look at other L1s, like there's a few different categories that we saw of things that are missing. The first, in terms of time to finality, you want really fast time to finality. And these other ecosystems like Ethereum and Solana, for example, they have multi-block finality. So a block can be added to the network, but it can then be reorged away. And if reorgs are possible, as you were mentioning, it leads to a really, really poor user experience. So that's one thing that we noticed that we thought could be improved a lot. The second is just in terms of how fast it is. Like if it takes 3 seconds, then from a market making standpoint, that's really, really long. And whenever you have longer times between updates for market makers, you're taking on more risk. So then you offer wider spreads, which results in a worse trading experience. So that's why we wanted to have lowest possible time to finality, and that differentiates Say from every other chain in existence. The second thing is around throughput and gas fees. So we want to support as many transactions happening at the same time as possible. And we also want to, as a result, have lower gas fees than what other ecosystems are offering. Like Ethereum, for example, even right now, it's still ridiculous to do anything on Ethereum L1. Like if you're trying to do a $20 transfer, it might still cost you several dollars to do that transfer. And that's definitely not the future that we see happening. So we added in parallelization. We also added in some other improvements that helped improve the overall throughput for the chain. And the last thing is around front running. So front running is when, let's say you want to place a trade, Chong, someone sees that and then they place a trade right before you. And by doing this, they're able to make money off of you. So they either sell something to you at a higher price or they buy it from you at a lower price. This is illegal in traditional financial markets. So if you do this in American stock markets, that's illegal. But for some reason, people, I guess there isn't necessarily that much regulation in crypto yet. So a lot of people take their own kind of strategic decisions and do front run people. So at the base level for Say, we offer a native matching engine. And the way that this native matching engine works is if you're building an order book based exchange, then you can just use this primitive and you can deploy the exchange very easily. And then there's, rather than having every single transaction get processed one after the other, at the end of the block, every single order is just clumped up together, and then they all get executed at the same uniform clearing price. The impact from that is that you can no longer have front running within a block because everyone's getting the exact same price and everyone's orders get filled at the exact same time. So those would be a lot of the modifications and improvements that are there with Say that you just don't see with other ecosystems.
I see. The picture is getting more clear now. Because the main reason why I asked you this question is that you mentioned about you mentioned that you are building a specific layer 1 blockchain for like trading. And I'm trying to make the connection between what you mentioned about your strong point about like your finality, your throughput. And I'm trying to connect between like the tradings and what you mentioned prior to this, and it's getting more clear now that like, and it's a very fair point that trading experience highly correlated with the throughput and finality time. So that's one of the that's like one of the good reason of why Say is like a very good blockchain for trading. Another thing that I'm curious to know more about is the thing that you mentioned about like the order book features. Am I understanding it correct that, let's say for example, if I want to build an exchange on your chain, I don't need to like rewrite a smart contract like, let's say x time y equal k or like some concentrated liquidity AMMs. I can just like use this blockchain function off the shelf to create a market without like deploying a AMM smart contract. Am I understanding this correctly?
So if you want to build a order book based smart contract, you can write a very simple. So if you want to build an order book based exchange, you can write a very simple smart contract. There's examples of that in the docs, and you can make use of the primitives at the chain level. And if you want to build an AMM based smart contract, candidly, the way that AMMs were built, they don't really need ridiculously high throughput, or they don't really need optimization to the chain level because they were built to be optimized for ecosystems like Ethereum L1 right now. So yeah, there's no primitives at the base level for AMMs, but there are primitives for an order book based exchange.
I see. So can I put it simply that say blockchain have like a built-in function that allows like builders to spin their order book market very easily and efficiently?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly
I
right.
see. Because like um those protocol doesn't need to like worry about their launching their let's say concentrated liquidity, so on and so forth. They just like deploy the blockchain, deploy the market on say, and just hire a market maker to do the traditional market maker stuff without knowing to know
Hmm.
like how to deploy the manage the V3 liquidity and so on and so forth, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I see. Now things make a lot of more sense now to me. Because like there's a lot of misconception that you guys are dicks, like honestly. And this is like the first
Yeah.
time I have like a clearer picture of what say is, and like I'm getting more interested in talk to you more. But yeah, sadly we have only like 1 hour. So
Yeah.
yeah, before we move on to the last question for the community, which is like a very interesting question.
Hmm.
Um I would like to like translate what I was like talking with you for the last 10 minutes to into
Okay.
Thai. Then we move on to the final question. Then we concluded with the campaign um
Okay.
stuff. Okay, got it. Soโอเคครับก็ตะกี้ผมคุยยาวเนาะแล้วก็มีข้อมูลหนึ่งที่น่าสนใจแล้วกันแล้วก็โอเคอันนี้ก็ผิดที่ผมแล้วกันที่ผมไม่ได้ทำการบ้านมาดีพอนะคือเซเนี่ยตอนแรกผมบอกว่าเป็น DEX แต่จริงๆเขาไม่ใช่ DEX นะครับคือต้องบอกว่ายังไงดีต้องบอกว่าเวลาเราสิ่งที่เซทำเนี่ยเป็น Layer 1 Blockchain ธรรมดาเลยนะครับเป็น Layer 1 Blockchain ที่คนสามารถไปทำ Smart Contract ได้ปกติเป็น Layer 1ที่คนสามารถไปทำ dApp ได้ปกติเลยนะครับเหมือนแบบพวก Ethereum หรืออะไรพวกเนี้ยปกตินะครับแต่ทีเนี้ยข้อดีของเซเนี่ยคือเขาเป็นบล็อกเชนที่ออกแบบมาอย่างเจาะจงนะครับเพื่อทำให้การเทรดเนี่ยหรือประสบการณ์ในการเทรดของยูเซอร์เนี่ยดีที่สุดนะครับถามว่าทำไมถึงโฟกัสที่การเทรดเพราะว่าจริงๆแล้วทุกครั้งที่เราใช้บล็อกเทรดเนี่ย80-90%ของ transaction คือการเทรดนะครับเราซื้อ NFT เรา swap token เรา lending เราทำอะไรก็แล้วแต่ทุกอย่างเนี่ยมันผ่านการเทรดหมดนะครับทีนี้เจเขาก็เลยคิดว่าถ้าเราจะทำบล็อกเชนที่ดีเนี่ยเราควรจะต้องทำบล็อกเชนที่ optimize สำหรับการเทรดโดยเฉพาะเพราะว่าจริงๆแล้วสิ่งที่บล็อกเชนทำมันคือเก็บมูลค่าของสิ่งของของสินทรัพย์เนาะแล้วก็ทำการโอนสินทรัพย์ไปมาแล้วก็แลกเปลี่ยนสินทรัพย์ไปมานะครับซึ่งการแลกเปลี่ยนหรือการเทรดเนี่ยมันคือสิ่งสำคัญนะครับแล้วเขาต้องการที่จะรีดประสิทธิภาพจากสิ่งนี้มากที่สุดซึ่งเขามองว่า L2 มันไม่สเกลถูกไหมเขาก็เลยไปใช้ทางฝั่ง Tendermint Consensus แต่ทีเนี้ย Tendermint Consensus เนี่ยเขาก็บอกเฮ้ยมันยังไม่ดีพอว่ะเขาก็เลยรีดประสิทธิภาพออกมาให้สุดเลย ซึ่งเขาก็เลยได้คำตอบที่ว่าแบบเขาเนี่ยต้องการเขาได้สร้างเซมาเพื่อที่จะทำให้บล็อกเชนของเขาเนี่ย1มี finality time ที่ต่ำที่สุดหมายถึงว่ากดแล้วบล็อกมันคอนเฟิร์มเร็วแล้วก็transaction เนี่ยยืนยันอย่างรวดเร็วนะครับภายในระยะเวลาอันสั้นแล้วข้อดีของสิ่งนี้ทำให้การเทรดเนี่ยมันมีประสิทธิภาพมากขึ้นเพราะใครที่มันเพราะการเทรดแล้วมีบล็อก finality ช้าหรือว่าแบบมีการรอที่เกิดขึ้นเนี่ยมันทำให้ประสบการณ์การเทรดแย่ลง as a whole นะมันคงจะแย่มากถ้าสมมุติเราเทรดปุ๊บแล้วเรารู้ว่าเฮ้ย ราคาที่เทรดมันไม่ตรงกับราคาที่มันควรจะโชว์ขึ้นมาซึ่งเราเจอได้บ่อยนะครับใน Ethereum หรือ L2 อะครับอืมอันเนี้ยก็คือปัญหาส่วนแรกนะฮะปัญหาส่วนที่2นะครับคือเวลาเราพูดถึงการเทรดเนี่ยสมมุติผมบอกว่าผมทำโปรโตคอล A อย่างเงี้ยแล้วผมอยากจะมีสภาพคล่องอยากจะมีตลาดของตัวเองนะครับวิธีที่ผมทำใน Ethereum ปกติคือผมต้อง deploy Uniswap Smart Contract ถูกไหมหรือว่าแบบไป deploy ทำ exchange อะไร AMM ต่างๆแต่ว่าปัญปัญหาคืออะไรอะนะครับปัญหาคือการที่เราทำสิ่งเนี้ยทำ AMM เนี่ยหรือว่าทำสจัดการสภาพคล่องเนี่ยมันไม่ได้อยู่ในรูปแบบของออร์เดอร์บุ๊กอะเนาะคือสิ่งที่เซเขาบล็อกเชนเซเนี่ยเขามีมากกว่า Ethereum คือเขามี built in แบบฟังก์ชันที่ทำให้ dApp หรือว่าคนที่มาสร้างสมาร์ตคอนแท็กในเชนเขาอะสามารถทำตลาดออร์เดอร์บุ๊กหรือว่าตลาดแบบเหมือนในตลาดหุ้นไทยอะที่เขาเป็นแบบกำแพงซื้อกำแพงขายปกติโดยที่ไม่ต้องพึ่ง AMM อะได้นะครับซึ่งมันทำให้เขาจัดการสต็อกกล้องได้ง่ายกว่าแล้วก็การเทรดมีประสิทธิภาพมากกว่าสร้างตลาดต่างๆได้ง่ายกว่าเยอะนะครับมันก็เลยเป็นข้อดีที่ทำไมเอ่อเซย์เนี่ยถึงน่าสนใจในมุมมองของการสร้างการเทรดนะครับซึ่งมันก็จะมีคำถามมาจาก Crypto News ว่ามันใช้ทำการเทรดฟิวเจอร์ได้ไหมคำตอบคืออย่าลืมว่าทุกอย่างครับมันอิงจากการตลาดซื้อขายหมดนะครับไม่ว่าจะเป็นตลาดฟิวเจอร์ตลาดออปชันตลาดทุกอย่างเนี่ยมัน based on การทำ order book เลยการที่เซเนี่ยสามารถรองรับการทำ order book ได้อย่างง่ายเนี่ย หมายความว่าเขาสามารถสร้างอะไรก็ได้ที่มีอยู่ในตลาดปัจจุบันนะครับตลาดปัจจุบันไม่ว่าจะเป็น option future perp หรืออะไรก็แล้วแต่สามารถทำได้หมดขอแค่ระบบ order book เนี่ยมันถูกสร้างขึ้นมาได้นะครับแล้วก็ทำได้ง่ายแต่ว่าข้อดีคือมันจะเร็วกว่าชาวบ้านแล้วก็มีประสบการณ์การเทรดที่ดีกว่าชาวบ้านเพราะว่า finality time เขาสั้นนะครับอืมโอเคก็อันเนี้ยคือคอนเซปต์คร่าวๆของเซที่ผมว่าน่าสนใจพอสมควรนะครับคือเขาค่อนข้างแก้ปัญหาเรื่องของการเทรดแก้เพนพอยต์เรื่องเนี้ยในมุมมองอื่นที่น่าสนใจนะครับอืมก็ใครมีคำถามถามมาได้นะครับเกี่ยวกับโปรโตคอลนะเรื่องอื่นผมของดไว้ก่อนแล้วกันเพราะเขาก็คงไม่ค่อยอยากให้คุยเรื่องนี้ออกสื่อเท่าไหร่ด้วยเรื่องของกฎหมายนะโอเค alright Jay let's move on to the last question which I would love to know what's your opinion on this let me go through this question um it's oh wait I can't find oh okay this one is quite interesting because like the question asks like what's your strategy on letting people build on top of say or use say apart from those airdrop hunters because like let's wind down a bit because like currently people are getting too crazy about layer zero airdrops and when we talk about airdrops like the next thing that comes with airdrop is like C-bills and what was like your strategy on like trying to build the organic growth and try to like remove all the noise and make sure that all the growth all the metrics that you're monitoring apart from those like airdrop hunters that are like come and go how would you like what's your strategy to maintain the organic growth of your blockchain and how you deal with those C-bills?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest question here is like, how does SEI maintain relevance 2 years from now? Because when a project is getting launched, it's always easy for there to be a lot of hype around it. But how does the project ensure that 2 years in the future, people still care about it, right? And I would say that many crypto projects, like especially infra projects, they haven't been able to do that. The ones that have succeeded versus the ones that haven't, like the ones that have succeeded, they typically have communities and they typically have killer projects that are built. And the reason that all these things emerge, like you have communities if there's cool stuff, like cool shit to do on chain. There's cool stuff to do on chain if there's good killer applications that are getting built by strong developers. So the biggest thing to focus on from a infrastructure standpoint, from an L1 standpoint, is how do you get good developers to start building in your ecosystem? If you're able to do a good job with that, then then you'll be able to succeed in terms of having relevance in the longer term, right? So from, say standpoint, everything that can be done to help remove developer friction, that will be done. So there's currently a $120 million ecosystem and liquidity fund. These are commitments from market makers, investors, and other ecosystem participants for money to be either investing into projects building on Say, or this will be money that is deployed on chain. So this would be put into like different exchanges or different types of on-chain projects. So this is one thing that'll definitely be helpful. There's also an entrepreneur in residence program that is being set up. So anyone who wants to build a project on Say, but they might not know how to get started, you can join the entrepreneur in residence program, and from there you'll be able to get off the ground. And yeah, Say will just be supporting all ecosystem projects in whatever capacities it possibly can in terms of go-to-market support, investing support, etc. But yeah, higher level, the biggest focus is just going to be on growing the number of, at least helping introduce good developers to Say.
Yeah. Okay. So one very short question. Is Say Rust-based chain?
It has Rust-based smart contracts. The chain itself is Go-based, but if you're a developer, you don't need to know anything about Go. You will only need to write smart contracts in Rust right now. And in the future, Say will be supporting other languages for smart contracts as well.
I see. But it's gonna be in the end compiled to Rust before like.
So right now the way it works is there's COSM WASM smart contracts. So they're written in Rust, they get compiled down to WebAssembly, and then that's used by the rest of the system.
Okay, makes sense. So if like in the future, say supports, for example, Solidity is then gonna be compiled into WASM and then execute.
Yeah, so it'll be compiled down to something into some type of like bytecode that can be interpreted by the rest of the Cosmos SDK based chain.
Okay, cool. Okay, so this is like wrap up for the AMA today. Thanks for your time. It's been a very interesting discussion for me and a very good sharing session as well. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
to be
like
honest,
thanks
it's like,
for
yeah, sure.
sorry.
I was just about to mention that it's like this is like the one of the few times I was talked to like the people who actually trying to solve the finality problem. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from more of like an intellectual standpoint, it is really, really interesting around consensus mechanism design and in terms of the actual performance optimizations from an engineering standpoint. So yeah, I do think finality is super, super cool. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me on. I agree with you that there's definitely some misconceptions around say. I'm glad that we were able to chat through them. And yeah, these were very well thought out questions as well. So really appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, thanks you for like doing a very great work as a uh participant of the AMA as well. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so this will be like the wrap up session, and the final session will be in Thai. That will be mentioned about like the form for the people to fill.
Mhm.
โอเคก็ตอนนี้นะครับถึงเวลาทองที่ทุกคนรอคอยนะครับใครที่อยู่ดูจนจบก็ก็โชคดีไปหรือใครที่เพิ่งกลับมาดูนะครับก็โชคดีไปนะฮะ โอเคก็ในลิงก์นะครับอ่าส่งลิงก์ไปแล้วนะครับฟอร์มนี้เนาะอ่าก็ตอนนี้มีคนดูประมาณ90คนเนาะก็เผื่อใครอยากรู้นะครับส่วนโค้ดนะครับกำลังจะบอกต่อไปนี้นะครับผมจะไม่มีการพิมพ์ลงในกลุ่มนะครับแต่ว่า จดกันเอาเองนะแล้วก็อย่าเอาไปแชร์เล่นแล้วกันเพราะว่าเดี๋ยวผมพูดจบเดี๋ยวผมจะปิดเลยนะฮะเอ่อโค้ดในการเข้าฟอร์มนะครับก็คือ FY 58642นะครับย้ำอีกรอบนะครับ FY 58642นะครับจะไม่มีการซ้ำอีกรอบแล้วนะครับก็ร่วมกันกรอกฟอร์มรุ่นสนุกนะครับเผื่อได้ทั้งความรู้ได้ทั้งเงินเอาไปกินมาม่าหรืออาจจะได้โมโม่ก็ได้นะครับก็ขอบคุณทุกคนนะครับที่ดูจนจบนะครับ and Jay thanks again for having for joining our AMA today a very informative session
Awesome.
cool
Thanks for having me on. And thanks for listening in, everyone.
cool so let's the live end in 3 2 1 now thanks